Hey, book community. So today I wanted to talk about some books that made me tap out. Books or series that made me just kind of give up. Now, here a little while back, I did a video on books that I had DNF'd and might return to if I was convinced. These are books I probably won't be returning to. Books or series I probably won't be returning to. So let's get started. First of all is Berserk. I have the first and second volume here. And with Berserk, right off the gate, if you know, when you turn the first page on the first story, there's this scene that is very dark and disgusting, and off the bat, I probably should have stopped then, but I actually did finish the first book, and then I continued to the second book, and not for one particular scene. I could just tell this wasn't something I was into, and so I stopped. I don't even know, I used to have a bookmark in it. Somewhere along the way I stopped and I haven't returned. It's been over a year since I've put this down. But that's really not uncommon with a lot of manga. I've tried a lot of manga, not just manga, comic books. I really wasn't raised reading comic books, and so maybe it's something that you had to have experienced when you were younger, that you brought with you when you were an adult. I don't know. I just can't get into it. I've even tried One Piece. I've read at least the first 7 volumes of One Piece, and again, nothing that turned me off as far as content, but I just can't get into it. So the next book is quite different than Berserk. The next one is The Divine Comedy by Dante. Now, I have a friend who reads this every year. In fact, it's called The 100 Days of Dante, and they go through it and read all the way up till Easter. And I have tried it 3, I think 3, maybe 4, but at least 3 years in a row, I have tried going through this. And I'll tell you why it doesn't work for me. And this is something that I feel like I should probably push through, though I've attempted it 3 times and I haven't made it outside of it's divided up into 3 parts, and I haven't made it outside the first part yet. I don't do well with reading things in verse form. It just doesn't work for me. I have tried it. I love The Lord of the Rings, and I love his little snippets of songs and verse every now and then, but it's not the whole thing. It's not every line. This is every line. It's every line is in verse form, not necessarily rhyming all the time. That also depends on what edition you get, what translation you get. But I just can't. There are times when I'll read an entire section and I'll have no earthly idea what I've read. That doesn't mean this isn't a wonderful piece of literature. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it or that I shouldn't pick it back up. In fact, I would say that about all of these books. You know, maybe you would have a different experience with all of these books than I did, but The Divine Comedy, I had to tap out. The next book, again, very different than the first 2, is The Exorcist. Now, I know this is a lot of people's favorite horror book, and I did watch the movie, and I came away from the movie with a different experience than I did with the book. Mainly because I think the movie handled some things differently, probably because it's a little bit of an older movie, and content was a little different of what they can include, but not necessarily in the book. There were some things in this that, as a religious person, as a person of faith, they displayed some things that bothered me. I understand. I've read other exorcism type books and stories and have enjoyed them and didn't have the same problem that I had with this. This book went into detail a couple of times describing some things dealing with religion or dealing with Christ that just really bothered me. And so I couldn't finish it. I couldn't go any further with it. That's a personal thing. You may not have the same issue with that, but I did. And again, this book made me tap out. The next book. Now, I actually did complete this book. In fact, I completed the first 2 books of this trilogy. There's obviously a 3rd book in a trilogy, but then I think there's 3 or 4 more books after this. And that is The Warrior Prophet by R. Scott Bakker. Now, first of all, other people who've read this, whether they loved it or whether they didn't love it, they all agree it's very dark. The first book is The Darkness That Comes Before. So that was to be expected. I read The Darkness That Comes Before, and I really enjoyed it for the most part. R. Scott Bakker can write very well. I love beautiful prose. I love to be able to go into a story and just get lost in where the writing isn't clunky and where it may not be as approachable as other writing is, but it is just beautiful writing. And R. Scott Bakker has that. But the things he's writing about is so bleak and so dark and so any other word you want to use to describe it, that he has it all in here. And another thing, the first book had some issues. One way to get me to DNF a book quicker than anything else is essay. Not just the inclusion of it in the world, because I understand that it exists and I understand that it makes sense in certain contexts, but when it's written in a way that goes beyond just stating the fact or goes beyond, when it gets very descriptive, I just don't want to read that. And the first book didn't have a lot of that. And so I made it through the first book. This book went into essay and described it so much. Very uncomfortable. I did finish it. I'll say I may wish I didn't, because the very last scene of this book was also one of those scenes and one of the most horrific scenes I've ever read. And so when I got finished with this, I thought, I do not believe I can move on to the third book. Part of me wanted to finish it just so I can say I finished the trilogy. But was it worth it for me? I don't think it is. You may love the series. This isn't a judgment call of whether you shouldn't read it. It just didn't work for me. This last book is probably the most controversial of DNFs. I say controversial. I know this is all personal opinions. I like what I like. You like what you like. We aren't going to always like the same things, and that's fine. And with this, I appreciate this author's contributions to the fantasy genre. I appreciate all that they did. I appreciate their series. They deserve all the praise they can get. It just didn't quite work for me. And the book that I stopped on was The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. Now, I read the first two books. The first book was all right for me, and I maybe have even said, it's been a couple of years ago since I read it, I may have even said some positive things about it, because there was a lot of positive things about that book. And then I read the second book, and I thought the second book was better. And then I read this book. I read exactly 50% of this book, and I just come to the realization for myself, why did you tap out? Why did I tap out? Why did I give up on this book? And here's why. Because I had read the first two books, were very long books. I had read about half of this book, which is still over 300 pages, halfway through it. And I realized that I did not like one character that it had presented so far. Didn't like one character. And I'm very much a character-driven, character first. I would like to be involved in the story. I like to get lost in the characters' lives and know about their background and know why they do what they do. And I'm not saying that this doesn't give that. I'm saying that I didn't like what I was given. I just didn't like the characters. I felt like possibly it felt sort of YA. That may not be the best way to describe it. We are dealing with younger characters, so that's understandable. But just some of the decisions that were made, multiple decisions that were made, relationship choices, the way people talk to one another, I just didn't care for it. So that's me. And so people say, well, the slog starts, I don't know, 5, 6 books in. The slog started with this book for me, really, and ended with this book, because I have tried to come back more than once and pick up where I left off, and I'll get a few pages and I'll stop. I'll read the next chapter and I'll stop. And I've done that a couple of times since I initially stopped this, which again was 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I don't believe I'm going to come back. Now, the thing with tapping out is there's always a rematch. So is there a possibility that I would take one, multiple, or all of these books and try them again? Sure. I'll never say never. But as of right now, I have given up and I have tapped out. Though you may love these books, what are some other books that you may have said, you know what, for maybe I'm bored, maybe I don't like the characters, maybe the content's a little too out there for me, I just don't want to continue. What are some books that you have tapped out on?